You do not fight a radar network head-on. That was the rule. For years, every major military power believed radar was unbreakable. It wasn't merely equipment. It was a philosophy, a belief system, a towering structure of electronics and discipline. Germany believed in this rule most of all. They built the Freya early warning radar, the Würzburg fire control radar, and the rigid night fighter control grid, known as the Kammhuber Line. Together, these systems formed an iron cage of radio beams reaching across the continent. If a bomber entered that cage, German radar saw it. If radar saw it, a fighter launched. And if the fighter launched, death usually followed. Everyone believed this machine fortress was invincible. Even the RAF, which was supposed to break it, quietly accepted that at night the Luftwaffe owned the sky. But then came a young scientist with nothing more than notebooks, equations, and a stubborn refusal to accept the impossible. His name was Reginald Victor Jones, a 28-year-old physicist with sharp eyes, a sharper mind, and an uncanny ability to take a handful of clues and decode an entire enemy weapon system. When he walked into British intelligence in 1940, he had no idea he would become the single most dangerous opponent the German radar network would ever face. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't a pilot. He never fired a gun in anger. Yet he would change the night war more profoundly than any fighter ace or bomber commander. He was a scientist who broke the Luftwaffe's night. Jones began his war reading scraps, intercepted messages, blurry reconnaissance photos, the testimony of a captured German navigator, fragments from crashed aircraft. From these fragments, he built mental blueprints of German devices. His colleagues described watching him pause mid-sentence, stare into the distance, and suddenly say, "I know what they're doing." And he usually did. Meanwhile, Bomber Command was suffering catastrophic losses. German night fighters, guided by radar, were picking them off like targets on a firing range. The Kammhuber Line was too good. The radar operators did their job flawlessly. German controllers vectored fighters into bomber streams with surgical accuracy. Every night, the sky over Europe became a slaughterhouse of engines, fire, and falling aluminum. To the pilots, it felt hopeless. Many never even saw the German aircraft that killed them. They flew into darkness, knowing they were being hunted by machines they couldn't detect. They were flying blind into the enemy's arms. Jones watched the casualty numbers rise and knew something had to be done. So he made a decision no one else had dared to make. He would challenge the rule. He would fight the radar directly. He began by studying the Würzburg fire control radar. It operated at 560 megahertz, used a narrow beam dish antenna, and had remarkable accuracy for its era. If Jones could block or confuse that system, the night fighters would essentially be flying without eyes. His proposal was simple. Build a jammer that transmitted noise on the same frequency, overwhelming Würzburg's receiver. Senior officers laughed at the idea. Radar is too sophisticated for that, they said. It won't even notice your toy jammer. But Jones had already built it, in a small box the size of a briefcase. They named it Benzedrine because it kept operators awake at night testing it. One bomber was chosen to carry it. The night of the test was pitch black, moonless, and quiet except for the steady pulse of the engines. As the bomber approached the German border at 14,000 feet, Würzburg radar detected it instantly. German operators watched a clean, bright blip appear on their screens. Then the British crew activated the jammer. There was a burst of noise inside the Würzburg receiver. The blip flickered, smeared across the screen, and disappeared. The German operators stared in disbelief. They changed frequencies. Nothing. They increased gain. Nothing. They scanned desperately for bomber. Nothing. It had vanished from existence. For the first time in the war, a bomber had defeated German radar. A miracle had occurred, and only 3 people in Britain knew why. Jones was thrilled, but he understood the test was just one cut in the giant machine. To kill the Kammhuber Line, he needed to attack on every front. He increased the number of jammers. He diversified frequencies. He oversaw the creation of new devices, manned with the blind Freya radars, carpet to disrupt early warning sets, jostle to overpower communication channels. Every new invention sliced away another piece of the German night defense puzzle. But the masterpiece was yet to come. Window, thin strips of aluminum foil cut to exactly half the wavelength of German radar, calculated with meticulous precision. When dropped by the thousands, these strips reflected radar waves like real aircraft. They produced clouds of false echoes, overwhelming the display. Senior officers panicked when they saw the proposal. If we use this, they said, Germany will use it too. Good, Jones answered. Their radar depends on it more than ours. Still, they delayed for months, fearing that window would unleash an electronic apocalypse. Meanwhile, Bomber Command continued to bleed. Finally, in 1943, Jones persuaded Churchill to authorize its use. During the Hamburg raid, known as Operation Gamara, each bomber released bundles of window every 7 seconds. German radar screens erupted into pandemonium. Operators watched helplessly as blips multiplied, scattered, split apart, and reappeared across entire sectors. Commanders shouted into telephones demanding clarity. Radar crews insisted the sky was full of hundreds of bombers. Fighters scrambled blindly in every direction. They flew toward phantoms. They wandered in circles. Many never found the real bomber stream at all. Hamburg burned that night. But for the men inside the bombers, the most unforgettable sound wasn't the anti-aircraft fire or the drone of engines. It was the silence. No German fighters approaching, no radar-directed ambushes, no sudden bursts of cannon fire from the dark. For the first time, the night belonged to them. The Luftwaffe reeled. They attempted countermeasures, narrower filters, new frequencies, different antenna shapes. But every adaptation took weeks or months. Jones dismantled them in days. He had built a team of scientists, mathematicians, radio specialists, and code breakers who anticipated Germany's adjustments almost before they happened. Intercepts from German communication lines revealed confusion and desperation. Radar operators swore their equipment was malfunctioning. Night fighter pilots blamed ground control. Ground control blamed faulty technology. Engineers blamed operators. One sector chief wrote, "We cannot rely on our sets anymore. They lie to us." Jones listened to these intercepts with quiet satisfaction, not out of cruelty, but because every complaint meant fewer British airmen were dying, and he knew the war had not yet reached its darkest moments. Germany deployed new radar types, Neptune airborne sets, improved Würzburg models, and experimental long-wave detectors. Jones responded with jammers tailored to each. He built decoy transmitters that mimicked bomber formations. He created false beams to lure German fighters away from real targets. In some raids, German night fighters were pulled completely out of position, chasing non-existent bomber streams miles away from the real attack. Inside German command bunkers, chaos reigned. Officers pored over malfunction reports. Crews swore they saw bombers that weren't there. Some blamed sabotage. Some blamed Allied spies. Some blamed the equipment itself. No one suspected that a single British scientist had predicted the weaknesses of their systems before they ever activated them. By late 1943, the Luftwaffe night defense arm was collapsing. Fighter groups were losing too many aircraft. Radar crews couldn't trust their screens. Sector commands no longer knew where to deploy their limited resources. German pilots radioed their controllers in frustration, begging for bearings, vectors, and altitude corrections. Controllers had nothing to give. More than once, German pilots flew directly beneath bomber streams without ever seeing them. The bomber crews, long accustomed to flying through hell, looked out into calm, empty darkness and realized something extraordinary. They were winning. But the fight was far from over. Germany introduced a new defensive concept, Zamsal, Tame Boer, which relied less on radar guidance and more on free-roaming night fighters sweeping the bomber stream. It was a desperate attempt to restore their advantage. But even this could be broken. Jones responded by coordinating radar jamming with deceptive radio transmissions. German fighters were lured off course by fake beacons. Some were sent kilometers in the wrong direction. Others flew out to sea following illusory signals. The night once again belonged to bombers. At this point, German high command realized the problem was not merely technological. It was Jones himself. They didn't know his name yet, but they knew someone in Britain was anticipating every move they made. Someone was studying their radars with unnatural clarity. Someone was inside their wavelengths, inside their logic, inside their war rooms. Germany formed committees to analyze the failures. They held emergency meetings. They issued new procedures and orders. Nothing worked. They were fighting ghosts, ghosts made of physics and mathematics, ghosts summoned by a man who had never fired a gun. As the war progressed, Jones also became instrumental in detecting and countering German navigation systems like Knickebein, X-Gerat, and Y-Gerat. He understood how German bombers used radio beams to guide their attacks on British cities. By analyzing signal strength, timing patterns, and intercepted chatter, Jones reconstructed the layout of these beams and advised countermeasures. British crews transmitted false signals that shifted the beams by miles. German bombers released their payloads too early or too late, dropping bombs harmlessly into open fields. Hitler's rage over the failures of these raids was legendary, but he never realized a young British scientist had manipulated the beams. Jones's contribution extended far beyond jamming. He was among the first to identify the German V-weapons program by decoding cryptic references in intelligence reports. He predicted the existence of the V-2 rocket before anyone else believed him. His insistence on bombing Piedmont, where the rockets were being developed, saved thousands of lives. In this sense, he didn't just fight radar. He fought the future, and he fought it with intellect alone. Even inside Britain, Jones encountered resistance. Many military leaders distrusted scientists. Some considered him arrogant. Some dismissed his theories as fantasy. More than once, he was nearly removed from his post. And yet, every time his predictions came true, every time German technology behaved exactly as he said it would, every time lives were saved because he refused to back down. Those who worked with him described a man who spoke quickly, thought faster, and refused to accept limitations. He once said, "If it offends common sense, investigate it. The enemy depends on you assuming." He would never do such a thing. Meanwhile, the bomber crews who unknowingly benefited from his work continued flying into the night. They felt the effects of his genius in the form of silence, a lack of radar-guided attacks, a lull in night fighter assaults, an invisible shield protecting their approach to enemy territory. Many of these men wrote in their diaries about nights when the Germans simply didn't show up. They called them quiet nights, unaware that the quiet was created in a laboratory in London. As the war turned decisively against Germany, Jones's work only grew more crucial. The Luftwaffe introduced late-war attempts to recover radar capability, including advanced sets like Würzburg and the Mammoth early warning radar. These systems boasted impressive range and power, but Jones found ways to exploit their vulnerabilities. He directed mathematical modeling of radar waveforms, analyzed pulse repetition frequencies, and oversaw the development of jammers that targeted the exact harmonics these radars relied on. Even these giant systems couldn't withstand the onslaught of British electronic warfare. It was around this time that Germany finally discovered the truth. The Allied electronic warfare campaign was being run by one man whose reports, predictions, and countermeasures had dismantled their radar supremacy. When interrogating captured radar technicians, Allies often heard the same disbelief. "We did not understand how you knew," but the Germans never knew the full extent. They didn't know about the long nights Jones spent analyzing intercepts. They didn't know about the hours spent hunched over cathode ray oscilloscopes. They didn't know about the endless meetings where he fought for permission to deploy new countermeasures. They didn't know about the weeks he spent inside freezing British radar stations, testing theories that sometimes failed spectacularly before they succeeded. They didn't know the pressure he was under, the burden of knowing that every miscalculation would cost dozens, maybe hundreds of lives. Even after the Allies gained air superiority, night missions remained dangerous. Flak guns still tore through bombers. Weather still claimed aircraft. Mechanical failures, navigation errors, fuel shortages, all these still killed airmen. But one enemy was no longer omnipresent. One enemy, the unseen radar beam, had been blunted, and that changed everything. Survival rates improved dramatically. Bombing raids that once seemed suicidal became routine. The night skies, while still deadly, were no longer a perfect hunting ground for Germany. Jones had tilted the scales. As the war drew toward its end, Jones turned his attention to decoding the remnants of German technology. He helped uncover radar types that had never been deployed. He analyzed captured electronic systems, some of which were years ahead of their time. He understood that defeating an enemy wasn't enough. You had to understand how they thought, so future generations wouldn't face the same weapons unprepared. After the war, when he was finally allowed to speak openly, he said, "The Germans were superb engineers, but engineering can be defeated if you attack the assumptions behind it." Jones lived quietly after 1945. He wrote a memoir, Most Secret War, which remains one of the most detailed accounts of scientific intelligence ever published. He lectured at Oxford. He mentored new generations of scientists. He carried the memories of men who survived because of his work, and the sorrow of those he could not save. Many bomber crew families never heard his name, never knew that a young scientist in London had been fighting for them from behind the scenes. But Jones never demanded credit. He once said, "Let the pilots take the glory. They earned it." But the truth is undeniable. Thousands of airmen returned home because of him. Entire bomber groups survived missions that should have ended in catastrophe. And the sweep of history was shaped by a scientist who believed nothing was impossible. His legacy lives today in stealth aircraft, in radar-absorbing materials, in jammers and decoys and cyber warfare. Modern conflict is defined by electronic battles Jones helped invent. If this story moved you, please hit that like button. Every click tells the algorithm this piece of history is worth remembering. We're dedicated to rescuing the forgotten stories from the archives. If you want to join us on this mission, please subscribe and turn on notifications. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment with your city or state, and tell us if someone in your family served. Thank you for ensuring that R.V. Jones and the thousands of men whose lives were saved by his work do not disappear into silence. They deserve to be remembered